Welcome to Life Stories, where every story is a journey of growth, love, and unforgettable moments. Today, we bring you the inspiring tale of a powerful millionaire and a resilient street vendor. In the bustling streets of New York, their lives collide in a way neither expected, revealing the true value of independence, love, and understanding. Will they find a way to bridge the gap between their worlds? Or will their differences pull them apart? Join us as we dive into this heartfelt story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to begin today's story. Ethan Mitchell was not the type of man to be easily distracted. His life revolved around the relentless pursuit of success. A carefully curated world where business meetings, high-end investments, and managing his vast empire were his priorities. The streets of New York City, with all their noise and chaos, were not a place he usually wandered in his thoughts. Yet, on one hot summer day, something caught his attention as he was driving through the busy streets. He had parked his sleek, black car on a crowded corner, just another luxury vehicle amidst the usual mix of cabs and delivery trucks. As he stepped out, the rush of people moving in every direction surrounded him, each on their own mission. But then, like a beacon in the midst of the urban sea, a young girl caught his eye. She stood there in the middle of the sidewalk, holding a bottle of water, calling out in a tone that was both friendly and determined. "Ice cold, refreshing water, just $2. Who wants one?" Her hair was tied in a messy bun, and she wore a faded, worn-out t-shirt and jeans that clearly had seen better days. Her appearance suggested that life hadn't been kind to her, but there was a fire in her eyes that told a different story. Despite the oppressive heat, she stood tall with a confidence that seemed to defy the surroundings. Ethan couldn't help but watch as she went about her business, gesturing enthusiastically to the passers-by. She was hustling, doing what she had to do, and doing it with a level of professionalism that most people, even those far wealthier than her, lacked. She wasn't just selling water. She was managing her business with the energy of someone who had worked her way through hardship and came out standing tall. As he was about to move on, a man stopped in front of her. The encounter was seemingly ordinary at first. The man grabbed a bottle of water without even looking at her and took a sip. But then, without hesitation, he scowled and threw a snide remark her way. $2? Are you kidding me? This costs half that at the store. Are you trying to rip me off? It was at this moment that Ethan noticed something in her demeanor that he hadn't expected. The girl didn't flinch. She didn't shrink away or apologize as most people might have when confronted with such a comment. Instead, her response was sharp, unyielding. "Rip you off? I walked up and down this street 3 times to get this water. I carried a heavy cooler on my shoulder, stood in the sun for hours, shouting at people like I'm running the best business in town. If you want it cheaper, go buy it at the store," she snapped, her voice full of fire. Ethan watched, intrigued, as the man stepped forward again, challenging her. "You're taking advantage of people who are working hard," he spat, his words dripping with contempt. Without a pause, she stepped forward and pointed her finger at him, her voice rising with defiance. "Taking advantage? You already drank half the bottle. If you don't want to pay, spit it back into the bottle and give it back to me." The man blinked, stunned by her boldness, clearly thrown off by her unwavering stance. "Spit it out, if you won't pay," she demanded, not backing down an inch. The pedestrians around them, who had been quietly observing, began to laugh at the absurdity of the situation. The man, furious, huffed and threw a crumpled bill onto the table before storming off. Clearly embarrassed and defeated, Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. There was something different about this girl, something that set her apart from everyone else he knew. He had seen countless people with privilege and power, but here was someone with nothing, yet with all the strength of someone who had everything. Without realizing it, he started walking toward her. She was organizing the remaining bottles in her cooler when she looked up and saw him, a tall, well-dressed man in a suit, standing amidst the heat of the street as if he had just stepped out of a corporate office. He could tell she was sizing him up, as if trying to decide if he was just another passerby. Or someone who was genuinely different? You thirsty? She asked, raising an eyebrow at him. Ethan didn't answer right away. He watched her for a moment, as though trying to read her, before asking, how many bottles do you have? Mia, the girl he was still trying to figure out, narrowed her eyes. Why? I want to buy them all. She blinked, surprised. All of them? Ethan, ever the businessman, pulled out a crisp $100 bill and placed it on the table without hesitation. Let me know if you need change. Mia crossed her arms, eyeing him suspiciously. Trying to impress someone? Because if that's the case, don't bother. I already think you're weird enough. Ethan raised an eyebrow at her response. Let's just say I appreciate a good investment. She scoffed. So water is an investment now? He smiled slightly. You negotiate well. You have personality. You didn't back down when that guy tried to cheat you. Mia studied him for a moment, wondering what his deal was. Right. But that still doesn't explain why a guy in a suit is dropping $100 on street water. Ethan's eyes softened a little, but he didn't answer. Instead, he picked up the bottles and began carrying them to his luxury car parked nearby. Wait, you're actually taking them all? She asked, her tone now more curious than dismissive. Well, yeah, that was the deal, wasn't it? He replied, placing the last of the bottles in the car's trunk. But this still seems really suspicious, Mia said, watching him closely. Ethan paused, then turned to her with a faint smile. Maybe I just want to help. If that's the case, save your money. I don't take handouts, she said, her voice laced with pride. He didn't say anything at first, but his thoughts lingered on her words as he started to drive away. There was something about her, something unbending and raw, that kept pulling at him. He didn't understand it, but he knew he would be back. The days passed, and Ethan couldn't get the image of Mia out of his mind. He had seen many people in his life, those with power, wealth, and influence, but none like her. She wasn't afraid to stand up for herself, and her fiery determination to make something of her life despite the odds intrigued him more than he cared to admit. There was something about the way she lived, not asking for anyone's help, not begging for pity, but simply surviving, no, thriving in her own way, that touched something deep inside him. It wasn't like him to obsess over a chance encounter. His life had always been about control, about focusing on business and making calculated moves. But Mia Carter, the street vendor selling water, had thrown all of that into disarray. The next day, despite the busy schedule in his office, Ethan found his mind wandering back to that street corner. He couldn't help but wonder if she would be there again. He told himself it was just curiosity, that he was merely observing a rare personality. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just that. There was something more, something that felt like a pull. Without thinking, he grabbed his keys, tossed a quick word to his assistant, and left his office. He didn't even consider whether he should be doing this. His thoughts were fixated on her, and that was all that mattered. When he reached the corner, there she was, just as he had imagined, standing under the heat, calling out to passers-by with the same energy as the day before. The rhythm of her voice, the way she stood tall and unbothered by the world around her, it was as if she owned the street corner. Ethan parked his car at the corner and stepped out, blending into the crowd. He kept his distance at first, just watching. Mia's presence on the sidewalk had transformed into something more than just a vendor. She had become a force. A reminder that no matter how difficult life gets, there was always a way forward. When he stepped closer, she noticed him immediately. Her expression shifted, her arms crossing in front of her, and she gave him a knowing look. Well, the eccentric millionaire is back, she said, the sarcasm in her voice not masking the underlying curiosity. Ethan couldn't help but smile at her sharpness. I have a name, you know, he replied. That's great. So tell me, Ethan, are you here to buy more water? She asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced at the cooler full of bottles, then back at her. Maybe, he said, his tone light but testing. Mia's eyes narrowed. Maybe? So you're not here because of the heat? Huh? He raised an eyebrow. Let's just say I was curious. Curious about what? She asked. Clearly skeptical. You, he said, his voice steady. Curious about you. She let out a small laugh. Didn't know millionaires were interested in street vendors. Ethan didn't flinch. You seem different. You negotiate well. You have personality. You didn't back down when that man tried to cheat you. He paused. His gaze locked onto hers. You're not like anyone I've ever met. Mia studied him for a long moment. Her eyes searching, as if trying to figure him out. Right. But that still doesn't explain why you, of all people, want to buy all my water. I'm not here to impress anyone. You know. Ethan took a deep breath. I don't want to impress anyone. I just want to know who you are. The way you stand up for yourself. The way you don't take anyone's nonsense. It's refreshing. Mia studied him carefully, her expression skeptical. So, what now? You just keep buying my water and showing up to make yourself feel better? She wasn't rude, but there was an edge to her voice. She didn't want to be another object of someone's curiosity. Ethan wasn't deterred. Maybe I want to help. She shook her head slightly. Her arms still crossed. If you want to help, save your money. I don't take handouts. I make my own way. Ethan didn't respond right away. He just stood there, watching her, understanding the depth of her pride. The same pride he respected so much. All right, he said after a pause, pulling out his wallet and handing her a $20 bill. Keep the change. Mia hesitated for a moment before taking the bill. Her face shifting slightly, the smallest crack in her defenses appearing. If you think you can buy me, she said quietly, you're wrong. Ethan raised an eyebrow. I never said I was trying to buy you. She stayed silent for a moment. And for the first time, she looked at him a little differently. Then why do you keep doing this? He gave her a small smile. But this time, there was no smugness behind it. It was genuine, even though he wasn't sure why. Because I wanted to. Mia looked away, frustration and confusion written on her face. I don't need your charity. Ethan, I don't need anyone's help. But Ethan, undeterred, just stood there, feeling something that had been stirring inside him ever since they first met. It wasn't about charity, it was about respect, something that Mia had earned through her grit and determination. As he left, he looked over his shoulder. I'll see you around, Mia. She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes told him she wasn't going to forget him anytime soon. The days that followed were a whirlwind for both Ethan and Mia. Though they were experiencing entirely different storms. For Ethan, the office was the same. He had meetings to attend, contracts to review, deals to finalize. Yet, despite all his wealth and success, something felt amiss. His mind would often drift back to the corner of the street. To Mia, her unwavering spirit, and the fire in her eyes. She had gotten under his skin in a way that no one had before. And he found it unsettling. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more between them. Something he hadn't anticipated. It was as if she had become a part of his daily thoughts. And every time he tried to focus on work, there she was again, standing tall under the sun with her cooler, calling out to the crowd. Ethan found himself wanting to know her better. To understand the woman who didn't ask for help, yet seemed to need it more than anyone he knew. Mia, on the other hand, had no such distractions. Her life was simple. Sell water. Go to school. Pay bills. Repeat. She had her routines, her small victories, and the sense that she was making it on her own, without anyone's help. But Ethan's presence had started to chip away at that. His insistence on paying her more than her water was worth. His mysterious demeanor, and his quiet interest all worked against her desire to stay independent. She had always prided herself on never accepting charity, never taking anything from anyone. So when Ethan had paid her tuition anonymously, without asking for permission, something inside her snapped. She couldn't let him control her life. Couldn't let him change the course of her future just because he had the money to do so. The more she thought about it, the more angry she became. It wasn't the money that bothered her, it was the fact that he hadn't asked. He had assumed she would accept it. And that made her feel small, vulnerable. Despite all her resistance, There was something undeniable about the way Ethan treated her. It wasn't pity. He wasn't looking for a way to fix her. He simply seemed to see her, to understand her in a way no one else did. He respected her independence, admired it, and it made her feel as though maybe she wasn't as invisible as she often felt in the world. Yet, every time she allowed herself to feel something more for him, she would quickly shut it down. This wasn't her life. She wasn't the type of woman to rely on a man. Not even one as wealthy and influential as Ethan Mitchell. She had worked too hard, struggled too much, to allow anyone to come in and change the course of her future. Then, one afternoon, when she was at the university to settle an issue with her tuition fees, the news hit her like a punch to the gut. The attendant at the office looked up at her with a surprised expression. "There's no debt in your name," the attendant said, scanning the screen again to be sure. "You're all set. Your balance has been cleared." Mia's stomach dropped. "What do you mean? Who paid it?" she asked, her voice cold. "It was done anonymously," the attendant replied, smiling. "Everything has been paid off." Mia closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a wave of anger and frustration wash over her. She didn't need to think hard to know who had done it. Ethan. She left the office quickly, her mind racing. How dare he? How dare he make decisions for her? Take control of her life without even asking? She needed to confront him, to make him understand that she wasn't some charity case, that she didn't need his help. But deep down, she knew she wasn't as strong as she wanted to be. The next day, without any hesitation, Mia walked straight to Mitchell Enterprises. She didn't care if he was busy or not. She was going to make him listen. She didn't need his pity or his money. She was going to prove to him that she could handle her own life. When she entered the building, the receptionist tried to stop her. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. Mia forced a smile. "He's expecting me." The receptionist looked at her skeptically, typing Mia's name into the computer. "Sorry, there's no appointment for you. He's busy." Mia didn't care. She sat down in the lobby and crossed her arms, determined to wait as long as it took. She wasn't leaving until she spoke to Ethan Mitchell. When Ethan found out she was there, he didn't send her away. Instead, he walked down to the lobby himself. Curious but cautious, he found her sitting in the lobby, arms crossed and her face tight with frustration. Mia stood up as soon as she saw him, walking toward him with purpose. "We need to talk. Now." Ethan raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but unsure of what this would be about. "What's going on?" She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You paid my tuition. Why?" Ethan leaned back slightly, his expression calm, almost unreadable. "I didn't ask for your permission." "No." Mia spat, her frustration evident. "You didn't. And that's the problem. You're making decisions for me. You're trying to control my life." Ethan remained silent, but he didn't back down. "I never meant to control you." "Mia. Then why did you do it?" she demanded, her voice thick with emotion. "Because I wanted to," he replied simply. Mia's breath hitched, her chest tightening. It was the same words he had said to her the first time he bought all her water. It was as if he was telling her that he cared in a way that went beyond words, beyond the money. But Mia wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to open up, to let someone in after all these years of doing everything on her own. She turned away, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and anger. But deep down, there was something else, something she didn't want to admit. Mia spent the rest of the day in a haze, her mind struggling to make sense of the confrontation with Ethan. She had stormed out of his office, anger bubbling up in her chest. But as the hours passed, something else lingered in the back of her mind. The words Ethan had said kept echoing, haunting her. "Because I wanted to." She had expected him to apologize, to back down, to explain his actions, but he hadn't, and that made her think, made her question whether she had misunderstood everything. The money, the help, the gestures, it wasn't about him trying to control her. It was about something deeper, something that went beyond the transaction of wealth. Ethan Mitchell was different. He didn't fit into the mold of the entitled rich man who expected to be handed everything. There was sincerity in his actions, a desire to understand her. He saw her, truly saw her, in a way that most people never did. But that didn't mean she was ready to give in. It didn't mean she was ready to open up and accept the help he offered. No matter how much he claimed it wasn't charity. The next morning, as Mia stood on the street corner, selling her water under the hot sun, she couldn't help but feel the weight of Ethan's presence in her thoughts. He had been there the day before, but she hadn't let herself acknowledge it. She told herself that she didn't need him, that his world and hers were too different to ever coexist. And yet, every time she thought about him, something inside her shifted. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the way he made her feel, seen, heard, valued. She was interrupted from her thoughts when she saw him again, walking towards her in his usual suit, his confident posture standing out against the heat of the day. "Here to buy more water?" Mia asked, her voice more guarded than she wanted it to be. Ethan smiled, the same calm and composed expression on his face. "Maybe, but this time, no extra tip." Mia couldn't help but laugh. Despite herself. "All right, but you're still paying for what you get," she said, crossing her arms in front of her. Ethan didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his wallet and handed her the exact amount. No more, no less. As he took the bottle of water from her and opened it, he glanced at her with a look that seemed to carry more weight than any conversation they had shared before. "You're different," he said softly, watching her closely. Mia met his gaze, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't explain. She had spent so long convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, that she could survive on her own. But now, standing in front of him, she wasn't so sure anymore. "You're stubborn," she replied with a slight smirk, her defenses slowly starting to crumble. "You always show up at the most unexpected times." Ethan chuckled, a genuine laugh that made Mia feel, for the first time, like they were sharing something beyond the exchange of money. "I'm just curious," he said, his voice low. "Curious about you, about your strength, your independence. I admire it." Mia swallowed hard, the words stinging her chest. She wasn't used to being admired for things like that. Most people looked down on her, saw her as someone who was always struggling, always fighting. They didn't see the pride she held in getting by on her own. "Look, I don't need your money," Mia said, though the words felt hollow as soon as she said them. She had been repeating them to herself for so long. It had become second nature. But now, in this moment, she wasn't so sure. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze soft but unwavering. "I'm not offering you money, Mia. I'm offering you something else. Something that I think you deserve. A chance at something more. And if you ever want it, I'll be here." Mia's breath caught in her throat. And for a moment, she didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to people offering her anything without strings attached. She had worked too hard for everything she had to believe that anyone would give her something freely. But Ethan was different. Without another word, she took a step forward, closing the space between them. Her gaze never left his. And for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder what life might look like if she stopped fighting against the current. If she let herself be a part of something bigger than just surviving. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice softer now, more vulnerable than she intended. Ethan smiled, a knowing, gentle smile. "That's all I ask." As Mia watched him leave, walking back toward his luxury car, something inside her shifted. She wasn't sure where this would lead or what the future held. But she realized something important. She didn't have to do it all on her own. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for Ethan in her life. And that thought, that realization, felt like the first step towards something she had been too afraid to believe in. Something called love. As the days passed, Mia allowed herself to embrace the unexpected change in her life. Slowly, she began to let down her walls. Piece by piece, Ethan was still the same determined, successful man, but now he was part of her world. And she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could create something beautiful together. The barriers she had built for years started to crumble. And with every passing day, her trust in him deepened. Ethan, too, began to realize how much he had changed. His life had always been about control, about making things happen, but with Mia, he was learning to let go, to allow space for vulnerability, and to understand the power of giving without expecting anything in return. She taught him that love wasn't about grand gestures or power, it was about being there, being present, and sharing moments together. And with her, he had everything he never knew he needed. One evening, as they sat together in a quiet cafe, sipping coffee, Mia looked at Ethan and realized how much her life had transformed. What started as a chance encounter on a hot New York street had become the most important chapter of her life. Love wasn't something she had to chase. It had found her when she least expected it, in the most ordinary of places. With a smile, she took Ethan's hand, knowing that this was just the beginning. The future was uncertain, but together, they would face whatever came their way. Thank you for joining us on this journey of love, growth, and self-discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more life stories. And stay tuned for the next heartwarming video.